Loud and clear. Awesome. Dr. Maya Ziegler, Monarch Family Chiropractic. Welcome to our workshop. I apologize, I'm getting started late tonight. And I think you'll see showing up on our schedule a lot of spinal hygiene type topics and themes. And there's a reason for that, because movement is life. And a lot of times I ask people if it's 32 degrees or lower, right? If we're below freezing and we come across a river, out in nature, everything else is frozen, but that water, why? Because it moves, right? And so when we don't have healthy movement in our lives, we also move towards more static, more restriction, more stress. And so spinal hygiene is hugely valuable. Tonight is a little bit different than we typically do when we're talking about muscle strength. I took flexibility out because there's just too much to cover when it comes to muscle strength. So let's get started here. So this is a great quote by Dr. Tina Moore. She's a doctor of chiropractic, also naturopathic doctor. She says, lifting weights and adding a slab of muscle to your body is a non-negotiable as we age. Muscle wasting is a real consequence of aging, so actively battling the loss is necessary. Muscle is insurance as we get older. And we're just going to get into, some of the things we're finding in research and some of the things we're finding with the state of our population here in the US and in the world as it relates to muscle health. So let's first talk about sarcopenia. It is muscle wasting or muscle loss as we age. And typically around 30 years old, muscle loss occurs around 1 to 2% per year. So I share this because if you are in your 20s or 30s, know that what you're choosing to do today to build health, and especially to build your musculoskeletal health, you are really setting yourself on a trajectory for the years to come. So what you're doing in your 30s right now is setting you up to succeed in your 50s. And you've got to continue to build on that. Because if you don't, loss of muscle is a lot harder to regain back or losing muscle is a lot easier than regaining that back. So it's estimated that 10 to 25% of our seniors under 70 have sarcopenia, and as many as half of our 80-year-olds are impaired with it. And when we look at enforced bed rest, right, if you are hospitalized and you're required to be on bed rest, it can dramatically impact your muscle mass. I mean, you can lose 5.2% of muscle mass in the first 2 weeks of bed rest. And they say in terms of your quad muscle, by day 23, you can lose up to 10% of your quad muscle. So losing muscle mass happens much more quickly than gaining muscle mass. And while maybe some of us haven't been put on, enforced bed rest, but maybe some of us have been put in a boot, right? Or been put in a cast, and even a cast at 4 to 6 weeks, or post-surgery, if you had ankle surgery, knee surgery, gaining that muscle mass back after those interventions takes a lot of work. And so, and again, it doesn't matter what your age is. I want you to look at, really look at yourself in a mirror and say, okay, what am I doing? And how can I work to minimize sarcopenia as we get old, as you get older, as I get older, right? So let's talk about this, frailty. There's something called Frailty syndrome. And it's typically highlighted by weakness, slowness, low level of physical activity, self-reported exhaustion, and unintentional weight loss. I think as we all get a little bit older and we look at, say, aging parents or aging grandparents, we can reflect on how maybe a hip fracture or breaking our hip can be so impactful to the health and the trajectory of somebody who does fracture a hip. A lot of times we see somebody who breaks a hip, it's really a catalyst for downward spiral of health. I mean, back in 2017, this Journal of Internal Medicine found that in the US and Europe, all-cause mortality rate for people with a hip fracture doubled over the course of 12 years compared to those who didn't have a hip fracture, which basically means if you're older than 65 and you have a hip fracture, it's reducing your life expectancy. And so I'm just going to show you some research around frailty. Frailty and pre-frailty in middle-aged and older adults associated with multimorbidity and mortality. So the methods they used, if you look at this upper highlight, they're really looking at, our 5 categories: weight loss, exhaustion, grip strength, low physical activity level, slow walking pace. So one of the assessments that we do in the office is grip strength. If we see in our older adults around a 10 to 11 point drop in grip strength, typically it's indicative of a cardiovascular event potentially in the future, right? So if you're losing grip strength, we don't want to lose strength. We also know that if we have a slower walking pace, it's also an indicator of poor health outcomes. So if you meet 3 of these criteria, then you are considered frail. But frailty was significantly associated with multimorbidities, meaning there are multiple conditions or diagnoses associated with, meeting this frailty criteria. And those with 4 or more long-term conditions. So socioeconomic deprivation, so socioclass and our access to and certainly plays a role. Smoking, obesity, I found this interesting. Infrequent alcohol consumption also showed up. But associated conditions with frailty: MS, chronic fatigue syndrome, obstructive pulmonary disease, connective tissue, diabetes. And the last highlight there, pre-frailty and frailty were significantly associated with mortality for all age groups, and men and women, except women aged 37 to 45 after they adjusted some things. So again, as we're looking at this, to me, it's what's contributing to frailty. And if we have loss of muscle mass and loss of vitality in our ability to move, and again, loss of muscle mass can be corresponding to other health conditions. It's really telling a story in terms of how we age. This one, looking at the implications of frailty for clinical practice and public health. Frailty places a person at increased risk of adverse outcomes, including falls, hospitalization, and death or mortality. All older adults are at risk of developing frailty, and they're substantially higher among those with comorbidities, meaning they have multiple diagnoses. So they're obese and diabetic and have, another condition, high blood pressure, right? So as we start to add on the diagnoses or the conditions that give us labels, it is really an indicator of poor health. And again, we look at, it says with those with comorbidity, you see poor diet and sedentary lifestyles. When we're looking at chronic disease as an umbrella, chronic disease are lifestyle diseases. It is choices that we make over and over and over time for years and decades that were showing really poor health outcomes later on in life. This one, looking at, do social inequalities in people who are frail and disabled, are those the reason that we're seeing higher levels of mortality? And although they said yes, socioeconomics plays a role in that, having multiple morbidities is the strongest association with mortality for those who are frail. And let's look at this. This was a fascinating research that came out, let's see, 2022, October of 2022. This is looking at physical inactivity and outcomes related to COVID-19. If you just want to follow along with the highlights, those who were consistently inactive were 191% more likely to be hospitalized and 391% more likely to die than those who were consistently active if they had COVID. And although the odds were highest for patients in the always inactive category, Every lower category of physical inactivity increased the odds of adverse COVID-19 outcomes. So in their conclusions, public health leaders should add physical activity to pandemic control strategies. We need to be moving our bodies. We start building good, healthy muscle mass. It allows us to support mobility and balance and an ability to live independently. So when you have reserve muscle mass, it increases your chances of survival when you are sick or when you're hospitalized or both. If you don't lift weights, you age faster, period. So lack of muscle mass leads to exponentially higher risk of injury and worse metabolic health to poor metabolic health and other health conditions. And that's where I want to segue into, is talking about metabolic health here. So this is a frightening statistic that came out. And back in 2018, they did a study and they found that 88% of Americans were metabolically unhealthy. And when you're metabolically unhealthy, that means you're at risk for all chronic disease, period. 2022 comes around and it's 93.7. Almost 94% of Americans are metabolically unhealthy, meaning they are at risk for chronic disease, which is a massive concern. So the 5 components they look at in terms of assessing metabolic health are, let's see. I thought I had it up here. They look at healthy blood pressure, weight, cholesterol, triglycerides, and I think I do have the slide out later that we're going to look at. But this is what the researcher said. Again, 94%, that's basically 9 out of 10, 9 plus out of 10 of us, right? So that's every one of us here, 2, 4, 6, 8, 9. So we don't have 10 here, included in who's 16 on the chat. So of all of us here, maybe 1 or 2 of us are actually healthy cardiovascularly, and we're aging in a healthy way. The rest of us are on a trajectory for chronic disease. So this is what they said. These numbers are striking. It's deeply problematic that in the United States, one of the wealthiest nations in the world, fewer than 1 in 15 adults have optimal cardiometabolic health. Says, Megan O'Hearn, doctoral candidate in this Friedman School, the lead author. We need a complete overhaul of our healthcare system, our food system, and built environment, because this is a crisis for everyone, not just one segment of the population. We need to shift the conversation because disease is not the only problem. We don't just want to be free of disease. We want to achieve optimal health and well-being. I mean, you could have heard that sentence here in Monarch Family Chiropractic. We're always talking about how can we support more optimal health and well-being? How can we have a conversation about prevention? How can we get people in earlier so that we can stop this trajectory of chronic disease and poor health outcomes down the road, right? None of us are out of the woods here. So, I mean, this is really concerning with this coming out July of 2022. I mean, we're just heading in a very not great direction, and it's not sustainable. So let's talk about this. Poor metabolic health leads to increased obesity rates, cardiovascular disease. The first sign of that is high blood pressure, organ damage body-wide, creeping cognitive dysfunction, which leads, we see brain shrinking and inflamed, that leads to dementia, osteoporosis, osteoarthritis, body-wide inflammation, cancer, infertility, hormonal imbalances. Not only are you impacting you, but you're impacting your offspring through epigenetics, which is how our lifestyle choices turn genes on and off, and we're setting them up for obesity and metabolic dysfunction. Then we see immune suppression, which we are at higher risk for poor outcomes with infections, viruses, pneumonia. Not so great here. And where are the conversations around this? We are spending a lot of healthcare. We are spending a lot of tax dollars and a lot of money on healthcare. We're spending more, like 2 times plus as much as the next industrialized country. And our outcomes are last. That's a problem. And we can't look to, these big organizations or our government or healthcare to make the changes. We've got to make the changes starting with each of us, period. So again, going back to just that conversation around, this is about muscle strength and building good health around your musculoskeletal system. If you have healthy muscle mass, if you are taking care of your body and lifting weights, and it is really insurance for you in case you do get sick or in case you do end up in the hospital. We just need to be moving our bodies more. So if we talk about metabolic syndrome, which 94% of us are on track for, the internationally recognized standards for being officially diagnosed with metabolic syndrome, you have to fall into 3 out of these 5 categories. Waist circumference. Women, if you have a waist circumference greater than 35 inches, you're metabolically, it's an indicator of metabolic stress. And the research shows over and over that this waist circumference shows up over and over. It is a telltale sign. Men, if you have a waist circumference larger than 40 inches, you're falling into one of these criteria. If your blood pressure is over 130/85, if your fasting triglyceride levels are over 150, fasting HDL levels, take a picture of this slide so you can easily go to, your general practitioner, get some blood labs run, and you can really identify, are you falling into any of these categories based off of your blood labs? And it's a blood panel that, is run pretty regularly, but you can measure your waist circumference and you can easily measure your blood pressure. You can do that at any drugstore, or we will happily measure your blood pressure here. And if you are not lifting weights and you are not suiting your body with healthy muscle, then you are predisposing yourself to not be able to handle anything that comes your way down the road, if that makes sense. So the solution is really multifaceted, as this is a 100% lifestyle disease. And we're going to focus on the first 2 because we're talking about muscle strength, but lifting weights 3 times a week and really focusing on the bigger muscles. Like, you want to focus on building your glutes or your butt muscles, your hamstrings, and I would say anything that activates the back of the body. So your extensors pull you back here, and really the back of the body. But you really want to build up the glutes and the hamstrings and the quads too. So you're lifting 3 times a week. And if you have a diagnosis or a condition, then I think it's appropriate to hire somebody or work with somebody who can coach you through the movements under guidance. And you should be walking often outside every day. I think they say, I can't remember what the mile per hour is. Like, if we're walking certain mile per hour is an indicator of poor health. So, you do want to get your blood pressure up a bit by walking, getting a good walk in, right? Other lifestyle solution-based habits to take on are things that we cover in other workshops. So I talk about, certainly how you feed your body is massive and plays a huge role in that, right? Refined sugars, high fructose corn syrup, seed oils. You're going to hear more about that in a workshop coming up. Cooking meals at home so you know what's in your food. Getting sleep, reducing refined carbohydrates, lower your stress levels, honor your circadian rhythms, right? All of those are lifestyle things that you can do, but they require preparation, they require intention, and they require discipline and commitment to show up every day for yourself. We can't all live like saints. So 80% of the time, if we are doing what's most right for our health, then we're on a much better trajectory. I love the 80-20 rule. But in terms of muscle, we know how important muscle mass is. So, yoga is great. High intensity training and some of these, movement is great, but we need to be building muscle. That's what I want to get across to you today. And you should be committing to this 3 times a week. It doesn't have to be hours in the gym. Here's a couple quotes. We do not stop exercising because we grow old. We grow old because we stop exercising. And a 60-year-old person who's exercised for 20 years will look 40. Well, a 60-year-old person who never exercises will look 80. So my question to you is, as you are really, and again, this is nothing that any of us can answer, but it's really assessing, okay, how am I moving my body? We know that when you're getting adjusted and we're taking stress off of the brain, we see people have a clearer head. They're better able to make decisions and choices. Once they are consistent with one thing, it's easy to add other things to the plate of health. You know, adjustments are healthy movement to help support you building strength, both spinal hygiene wise in terms of how your spine moves, but looking at muscle mass. So when you get in the gym, you're not hurting yourself, right? You're not distorting yourself into more of a stressed pattern. So you're already getting adjusted, which is wonderful, already supporting a healthy brain. So it really is, and the workshops are all around what is appropriate for you to take on next. You know, when we're talking about detoxing, cleansing last week, maybe it is cleaning up, you know, the what you're using at home to wash your clothes. Once you bought your detergent, man, that's easy. You don't have to think about that again. So you think, oh, okay, I can add something else. Maybe it's looking at how can I start lifting 1 time a week, or just starting the process, right? But I think it's totally appropriate and a recommendation to take a picture of this slide, or keep these handy, or we can provide them to you when you come to the office, and get your measurements, get your waist circumference, get your blood pressure, schedule something to get your blood labs, and get a baseline. And then commit to doing something for the next 3 months, and then check it again. Even just checking waist circumference and blood pressure. And if you start seeing changes around your waist circumference, that means that your organs aren't being insulated by your fat cells. Okay? Because in order for your body to protect itself, it will take, you know, the stuff that we're consuming, that, and it'll package it in its fat cells. Then we see it start to show up around our bellies. Well, what's here? It's all of our organs. And so when our organs are insulated and things are real warm, our organs are functioning and working a lot harder, and it stresses all systems. So if you start to see change with your waist circumference, that is a big deal with the health of your organs, health of overall body and inflammation and those sorts of things. So my hope is in this conversation, it's giving you, urging you to have some level of, you know, urgency to start moving your body in a different way. These stats are concerning, and all of us are impacted. And only, you know, each one of us can make the choice to start making a change in terms of our movement and how we take care of our body. You're here already. You've already made a big, massive choice, you know? So it's what can you add to that as you feel like it's appropriate. So thank you for being with me tonight. We are doing a Patient Appreciation Week in 2 weeks. And this is where we give away our exam and our x-rays to anyone that you love and care for. Our goal is that people become more informed, more educated, so they are empowered to make different decisions down the road. And we want people to hear this message, you know, long before, you know, they are in a state of, man, I wish somebody would have told me about this. I could have made a lot of change in the 10, 25 years before where my health is now. So if you refer in any family, friends to our practice that first week of April, we'll have our board out tomorrow for the times that we have available. The exam, x-rays are done at our expense, and our way of giving back to you and your family, your friends, because we know people who do healthy things together make better decisions, hold each other accountable, and can really change the trajectory for them and at some point the community. That's our biggest goal. So we love you. We appreciate you. Thanks for hanging with me. And I'll see you next week for our Tuesday workshop, 5:45.